Alright, YouTube, it's time for the Occult video 101, Samhain or Samhain, or however people are pronouncing it nowadays, Halloween, All's Hallows Eve, everything associated with this general holy day, or holiday, this period of general time, sort of between the summer and winter solstices. And it's time to talk about the significance of this within my opinion, as well as sort of the historical backdrop of the same, from an occult perspective, of course, from the perspective of somebody who actually does believe, generally speaking, in what many people would term magic. Memetics, psychological force, cosmic forces, whatever you want to label these things, certain aspects of the paranormal, certain cryptids and so forth, aliens, everything under the sun. I think in the first 100 videos within this playlist, I covered a variety of different topics. Some of them are related to literature. Some are related to different aspects of magic as a total. And at times I was more subjective. Because I don't proclaim to know everything with regards to the occult. As far as any objective basis. For instance, is there a deity? I don't care. I'm an apatheist. It doesn't matter to me. I think sometimes people assume that I'm an atheist. A lot of people think that I'm still a Satanist, though, so it's rather funny. As far as this particular holiday goes, I'm not one of those pagan individuals who says, oh, Halloween's evil, the Christians are stealing our holiday, and it's horrible, it's atrocious. Well, at the same time, does it really matter? Does it make any difference if someone who doesn't believe in paganism doesn't follow the pagan tradition of the holiday? I answer no, I don't really care. The too spooky for you stuff, the trick-or-treating and the horror movies and so forth, regardless of your upbringing, yeah, it's entertaining. It is heavily commercialized. It is an excuse for candy companies to make more money, for certainly sort of the B-movie horror crowd to make more money, and to get their stuff run in the theaters and so forth. You'd think of like Hocus Pocus or any of these cult films or Evil Dead or something like that. That's very much the case, but I ask, on what objective basis is that materialism wrong? Then it boils down to a spiritual, philosophical debate over the relative aspects of hedonism and materialism versus maybe an ascetic path or one that's more traditionally spiritual. I don't delve into such things, generally speaking. I've declared myself an Epicurean. That is to say, I believe pleasure is the highest good, but simple pleasures, not, sports cars and mansions and stuff like that. That's just the way that I happen to roll. Other people happen not to. I see no problem with that. The authentic tradition, additionally, it really depends on sort of the part of... A lot of people are Eurocentric. And so what they do is they look at the way in which Christians post-Rome sort of adopted some of these figures, holidays. You'd think of the Christmas tree. The Christmas tree is a Saturnalia-based sort of pagan ritualism. It has to do with, Yule has to do with, like, fertility and drinking, and literally, in some cases, taking hallucinogenic mushrooms, depending on the subculture you're talking about. That being said, there are other parts of the world that at the time were not influencing that general tradition, in many cases with their own spiritual paths that do have overlap, but does that necessarily mean one was stolen from the other? Again, I argue no. I say that some of these pagan traditions coming out of the Caucasus region, that is what's now parts of Chechnya into Armenia and Azerbaijan over into northern Turkey down into Syria, sort of this general diaspora of what became Western civilization, from the steppe, from the mountains, actually to the west, interbreeding apparently with subgroups there. I say we don't necessarily know enough about those traditions to go back far enough to say what the true traditions are. Maybe their conception of that time of year, if they had a holiday for it at all, for all we know in their forgotten lore, they'd be talking about giving people sweets on that day. So the argument from tradition, I think, doesn't really do a justice to paganism. It doesn't really do a justice to the occult. The idea of All Hallows Eve, for instance, even some of the Christians Christianizing this holiday, they kept the supernatural aspect. They may have cast it as negative, but the idea of spirits floating around and you have to sort of appease them and light their way back to the grave with a jack-o'-lantern or a gourd with a candle in it or something, I see no problem with this. And let's face it, most of us in the West were raised up under that general tradition. You can argue over the historical impact of different time periods, especially within the United States. We would think of the fact that over time it certainly has morphed. You look back 100 years, you look at some of the Halloween costumes from back then, they're way scarier than anything you're going to find today. They were just all sorts of screwed up. And people held balls, and they had a dance, made bob for apples, and did these various things. Earlier on, of course, if you read literature from the Victorian period, the more honest period of historical study, I would say, than the modern period of what you would call Christian literature or something loosely associated with academia at best, these more honest individuals were willing to admit, for example, yes, indeed, most of the imagery associated with these holidays comes from paganism. The dates generally or date ranges come from paganism. That's very much true. But does it matter? Does it affect me as somebody who doesn't celebrate what you would consider maybe the more traditional side of Halloween in the Christian or the American sense? Does it matter to me that others do? No, it doesn't bother me at all. I think we can't let ourselves slip into being complete purists on these things. People are going to choose to do what they want to do. That celebration is there, partially because of corporations, like modern Christmas. Modern Christmas, in a way, is a fabrication of the Coca-Cola Company. The idea of Santa bringing gifts and all of these things, in the modern sense, it is basically from this century, the last 100 years. Before that, you don't really get these things. You're talking about Father Christmas, and you're talking about blessing the poor in a Christian sense. And before that, you're literally talking about taking mushrooms and drinking a lot, probably passing out after a pagan orgy. Now, I like the idea of passing out after a pagan orgy a little bit better than the Christian side of Yule, of Christmas, just as I prefer the pagan trappings of Samhain, Samhain, All Hallows Eve, Halloween, whatever you term this period of time. But that being said, I have no problem with the jack-o'-lanterns. I think they're wonderful. Trick-or-treating's great. And indeed, when people are watching horror movies and reading spooky stories and dressing up as demons and ghouls and things like that, the one thing that the evangelicals are correct about is that it does desensitize them to these things. It makes them fear them less. Now, I say that's a good thing, that ridding of fear, of the unknown, of the dark, of zombies and ghouls, of Satan or something. I see that as positive. Anything that helps people get over their collective panic about their own death, I see as a good thing. They see it as an evil thing. They see it as, well, this is the devil's trick. A lot of them don't celebrate Halloween. They think it's an evil holiday. They're only correct if you consider that, yes, indeed, Halloween is from paganism. And they conflate it with authentic pagan tradition, even though it's been completely overhauled and has basically nothing in common with its original trappings. But I would agree with them on that tenet. Yeah, it frees people of guilt and fear around this particular holiday. So you have women dressing up as sexy demons, sexy nurse typically, or something like that. You have kids going out, and they get candy. We always have every single year some sort of scare involving razor blade apples or something. I can remember when I was a kid. It was a big scare. And for a while their parents wouldn't let little kids go out trick-or-treating, and they would check through every piece of candy if you got it. They were afraid you'd be poisoned, or someone literally had to put a needle or a razor blade in your apple. They were afraid that someone would try to give you AIDS or something, or abduct you and try to molest you or something. And that was common. That's sort of the late satanic period, panic period when I was a little kid. And it was more prevalent than you may think. Maybe not in some parts of the country. Here, oddly enough, in the most secular part of the country, it was wild, honestly. People were selling little wooden amulets supposedly made of what they called witch wood to keep the evil eye off their kids and stuff. It was wild. But yeah, indeed, I don't have a problem with the Christianized version of the holiday. I don't have a problem with the early Christianized version or the modern corporate Christianized version, but I don't happen to celebrate them for that reason. I happen to think that period of time is important for largely things related to the movements of the planets and the Earth around the sun, and things of that nature. But that being said, yeah, jack-o'-lanterns are great, pumpkins are great. Of course I like decorating with them, corn stalks and stuff. It's fun. That's what it boils down to. It's fun. Yeah, it's materialistic, but it's entertaining for people, and I don't see the big problem with being a moralist or a traditionalist along specific line of the holiday, let's just face it. That's about all. Peace out.